Welcome to a YouTube exclusive for the Old Man of the Three. We are going to talk Wolves-Grizzlies and a little bit of Suns-Pelicans, Tommy. I think we should start with Wolves-Grizzlies. This was the game of the night last night. Came down to the wire. By the way, I know you've watched this series. This has been probably the most entertaining series to me.
Yeah, we said it going in, and it's lived up to the hype. On the court, off the court, people being chained to the court. The whoop that trick at the end, the post-game music, everything about it was. Did you think, and we're going to get into the last 15 seconds in a second, did you think that it was done in the third quarter?
Well, so I was watching the game last night, and when Karl-Anthony Towns hit that three that put them up, I think it was 12 or 13 with about 8 minutes to go and shushed the crowd, it felt like the Grizzlies had zero momentum and weren't going to be able to pull this out. An underlying story, and a bunch of people have noted this on Twitter, but an underlying story in this entire series has been Jaren Jackson Jr. can't stay out of foul trouble. And I believe he's fouled out of 2 of the games, but he's been in foul trouble in nearly every game. And because they've taken Steven Adams out of the lineup, for the most part, obviously he's had some bit minutes here and there since game 1, but because they've taken him out of the lineup, that's really affected their defense. Again, I talked about this a bunch on ESPN, Tommy, but one of the adjustments that the Wolves or one of the adjustments that the Grizzlies made against the Wolves was going smaller, taking Steven Adams out of the starting lineup, and sort of switching with Cat. And if you watch them, and RJ talked about this the other night on the broadcasts on Saturday night, if you watch how they're doubling, we used to call this green when I played in Orlando. San Antonio basically invented this, but you play high side on the post. So when he gets a smaller guy, Karl-Anthony Towns gets a smaller guy on the switch, he goes to the post. They play high side. They force the lob pass over the top. And instead of the help coming from the nail, the double coming from the nail, the help is coming from the baseline. And what that allows is the primary defender who's in that sort of front or three-quarter, it allows him to prevent Karl-Anthony Towns from turning back towards the middle and having a passing angle. And it's very, if you run this correctly, it's very disruptive because a lot of teams will bring the double from the nail. And if you do that, the guy can turn over his shoulder, face back towards the court, and sort of pick your defense apart. It's a very effective strategy. It's hard to do, but if you do it right, and they've had varying successes at times, but they've done it for the most part since game 1.
Well, 2 things before we get to the last 2 plays. Are you surprised at the Grizzlies' lack of success in the half-court offense? Because that's another thing that a couple people have talked about, and it seems like why they've bogged down in a few of these games so far offensively has just been when they slow it down. And is that going to be a problem if they win in game 6? Is that going to be a problem for them moving forward? And then the other thing we have to talk about is the dunk before we get to it.
Oh yeah, well. On the half court offense, that's been a problem for the Grizzlies all season. They their points per possession all season hasn't been great in the half court. They rely on that speed and athleticism. They rely on turning defense to offense. You've obviously seen a number of highlights of Ja Morant getting out in transition and making spectacular plays, but it's him pushing the ball. It's Desmond Bane getting steals and dunking. It's Dylan Brooks out in transition, Kyle Anderson running the floor. They rely on that speed that they have, that youth that they have to create points. And the playoffs generally slow down. Teams do a better job of taking care of the ball in general. Teams do a better job of being selective when crashing the boards. Teams do a better job of emphasizing getting back on the shot. And so this is 100% going to be an issue going forward. And this is one of the problems. And again, we love the Grizzlies. We talk about the Grizzlies all season, Tommy. But a question for you, outside of Ja Morant, like who are the creators in the half court? They don't have them.
Well, Bane is not necessarily a traditional creator, but he has shot well this series, and it seems like he can still get his shots. He can figure out a way to get his shots when he needs them. It just my question is a little bit: is this still a young team situation? I know like they struggled in the half court all season, But is that just and the defenses change in the playoffs and the pressure ramps up in the playoffs? And is there a part of it where like the execution, it's more execution than instinct when you're in half court, and is that something which is like exacerbated the problem a little bit?
It is. Some of it's just playoff defense, game planning. I talked all season about the playoff game planning against Ja, and he's had some off shooting nights. You're going to see more unders on pick and rolls. You're going to see more paint packing with secondary help defenders. And so much of his offense that he generates in the half court is in the paint against drop coverage where they're going over the top, which, again, I don't understand that philosophy, but I saw teams do it all season. He's able to turn the corner, get into his dribble package against a big, and shoot that floater that he loves so much. And he hit some last night for sure, but we haven't seen as much of that. And if they are, if he is in the paint, it's contested by two guys. And from the field, especially in Game 3 and Game 4, he struggled. The dunk, one of the greatest playoff dunks ever, one of the greatest in-game dunks ever that we've seen. That's not a hyperbole. I mean, this is, again, Malik Beasley is not Kevin Love, but this is the Kevin Love dunk that he did not complete. Only this time he completed it.
Well, so I think, it's going to take a little bit of, time and perspective when you're ranking best playoff dunks ever. But when you also consider how it turned the game, don't you think that adds to it a little bit as well? And that this wasn't just the dunk in the first quarter of him, putting somebody on a poster. This team was at home in a pivotal Game 5 with the air completely sucked out of that building. And then all of a sudden he drops his hammer and they end up winning. And that doesn't even when you look back at some of the other great playoff dunks of all time, there's not a ton of examples of a shifter like that was that significant, even if it is in the first round.
It was a pivotal game, obviously 2-2, Game 5. Memphis crowd was into it the whole game, but that brought a new level of energy. It definitely turned the momentum, and it truthfully got Ja going. So 8.2 seconds. Wolves are taking the ball out of bounds, down 3. Now, I am not going to shit on anyone's coaching philosophy, but my personal philosophy is, and a number of teams and coaches I've played for have had the philosophy, that you get down to 7 or 8 seconds, up 3 at the end of a game, and you foul. You don't allow the 3. You don't allow the possibility of a 3. You rely on fouling, making free throws, and you do that over and over again until the other team runs out of time. You have to be smart with fouling, obviously, but with the rule changes now in terms of being in the shooting motion, it's much easier now than it was 5 or 6 years ago to foul at the end of the game. Personally, I would have fouled. That's point number 1. Point number 2. So you've got Bane, Kyle Anderson, Dylan Brooks, Brandon Clark, and Ja Morant on the floor for Memphis at the end of the game in that possession. That's their defensive lineup. Jared Jackson Jr. is fouled out, so he's not in the game. So you've got Dylan Brooks guarding Karl-Anthony Towns, obviously looking to switch. I'm assuming they're switching 1 through 5. I'm having a hard time understanding why you put Ja Morant on Anthony Edwards. So they run the DHO, the dribble handoff. Karl-Anthony Towns gives it to McLaughlin. He turns the corner. They elect not to foul. Kyle Anderson goes underneath and tries to meet him at the nail. Ja Morant's off-ball awareness leaves a lot to be desired on this play. And I'm not sure if they were switching 1 through 5 or not, but you've got a flare screen that's set for Anthony Edwards. Brandon Clark is staring at the ball. This is a play, Tommy. It's a very basic play. Chris Finch, by the way, we used to joke because he used to coach in England, and some of the end-of-game plays, he would show me them. Some of the end-of-the-game plays that he used to run in England were wild. I used to run this play in high school. This was a play for me in high school. We called it Chicago. And in high school, when you run a dribble handoff on the left side and I get a flare screen on the right side for a right corner 3, it worked 100% of the time against high school defense. This is not a creative play. And I'm not saying Chris Finch is not a creative offensive guy. I'm saying this is a basic thing. I watched this play 15 times today. There was no secondary option. There was no flare screen on the backside for Karl-Anthony Towns. He gives the DHO, and he starts watching the ball as well. This was a one-option play to get a flare screen. And they botched either the switch or they just botched the off-ball awareness.
And we've talked about, you are sort of one of the biggest proponents of this, the corner three, and what that is in the NBA, and how you cannot give a good look on a corner three to any sort of good shooter. Anthony Edwards is clearly a good shooter. You would agree that he's the best shooter on the court for the Timberwolves at that point in the game.
Well, Karl-Anthony Towns. But again, you have to expect that any action with him is going to be a contact switch. And two, look, 8.2 seconds. Not every team goes for a three. Not every team goes for a three there. If I'm Ja Morant in that situation, and again, I'm putting myself in his shoes, I don't know what was said in the timeout, and so I'm taking that sort of out of it. I'm just looking at the context of how I would have defended that play. I would not have been off the body. You need 3 to tie. A 2 does not hurt you. I would not have been off the body. I would have been hugged up against Anthony Edwards. And for Brandon Clark, it's the same thing. I would be hugged up on my man. I'm not going to worry about protecting the rim against a layup. And in that scenario, it's either a sort of fight over the screen for Ja Morant, or it's a contact switch. And they're both in help position up 3 with under 8 seconds. I don't understand it. Taylor Jenkins is a great coach. I just don't understand it.
But this gets back to my point earlier, and we're about to get into the game winner. This is youth. To me the youth. It's the lack of experience. It's the moment is big, and these are the best players on the planet. So their talent, both Anthony and Ja, their talent vastly makes up for any mistakes that they might make. But these are just 2 basic defensive mistakes that just come from lack of experience.
All right, so let's talk about the game winner. Tremendous finish from Ja Morant. Let's be clear on that. Vanderbilt came over as the help. He adjusted midair, went to the left hand. There was, I would say, good, not great, but good verticality from Vanderbilt in defense at the rim. But that's not where the play broke down. I called Game 3 last Friday, the Heat-Hawks game in Atlanta, and it came down to the wire. Trae Young hit the floater to put them up. And this is just a basic sort of concept. You run a pin down, you run a loop cut, essentially. Miami ran it on the other side, on the left side. They ran it last night. They ran it on the right side. But you run a loop cut, you get the ball to your best player, your best offensive player. You get him the ball at the top of the key, and he's got 3 or 4 seconds, which was the same case in the Miami game. He's got 3 or 4 seconds to create a shot. Again, they elected not to switch. Anthony Edwards had a lock and trail against Ja Morant at about the block on a pin down. And again, this is where we bring up youth. I don't know in that scenario why you're locking and trailing Ja Morant 40 feet away from the basketball. Not only that, I don't even think it was a gamble. He just took a really bad angle. So you're taught when you do lock and trail, if you do lock and trail, once you get over the screen, the philosophy or the technique is you got to sort of meet the guy at the point of the ball, wherever that pass is going to be. You got to sort of get back in front. And he looped all the way around and got on his back. It's poor technique, and obviously Ja Morant recognized that. He made a great read, curled it in, great inbounds pass, laid it in at the buzzer. And again, to your point, I think you're spot on, Tommy. I think this is the moment. It's youth. So there was offensive execution to the nth degree. Both teams executed both plays offensively great, but the defense left a lot to be desired.
Well, is there with an athlete with the explosiveness of somebody like Ja, does lock and trail ever work? I mean, obviously there are cases where he's not going to finish, or he's not going to hit a shot. But like, is that ever a defense that should be run on somebody who's that quick?
It's not even the quickness. It's like, what are you willing? Again, against great players, you gotta pick a poison. You got to pick your poison. So what are you willing to give up? And in that situation, if he gets a pin down 40 feet from the basketball and he runs up to the top of the key and you shoot the gap and he shoots a 3 there because you're off the body, to me, I'm willing to die with that. I'm not willing to die with him curling inside the free throw line and getting to the basket. That is his strength. That with great players, you got to take away their strengths. It was really interesting, Tommy, when you think about it. You had Ja Morant guarding Anthony Edwards and Anthony Edwards guarding Ja Morant at the end of the game, which is kind of what – look, I'm not – this is just – both teams have better defenders to guard the primary scorers of the other team.
Yeah.
Both teams have better defenders.
I was thinking last night, it's if you make like a football analogy, it's like if you're a cornerback, just don't let the guy get behind you. It was like they both let the guy get behind them. It was like anything else can happen, but just don't let that one thing happen. And they both broke down, and that's where we are. Do you think we're about to move on to this Phoenix game quick? What is your 10-second takeaway on what you think from Game 6 is going to look like?
I think we're going back to Memphis.
I think it's going to go back.
I think we're going back. I think there's going to be for sure a protest. There's going to be some sort of person that tries to run on the court.
Can we shout out the security guard real quick from that tackle was incredible.
The awareness, just just super dialed in, clearly knew something was going on, had spotted something happening.
Perfect form, perfect explosion. Talk about good technique. Also, I don't really want to comment. I don't think either of us want to comment on what's happening with the actual protest, but these protesters are really dedicated. I mean, they just keep coming. Like having it once is one thing, chaining yourself to the basket is a second thing. And then after this, I mean, who knows what Game 6 is going to look like.
I was at Game 4 in Brooklyn, Nets Celtics. I took Knox, Kai, and Chelsea, and we were sitting about 5 rows behind the Brooklyn bench. And so the next section over is where sort of the corner of the arena starts. And there was some commotion. And so I looked over. This was fourth quarter. Me and Knox had stayed for the fourth. Kai needed to go home because he was getting grouchy. So I look over, and there's a bigger gentleman that is arguing with a security guard. I'm not sure what happened prior to that, but he's arguing with the security guard. And then he takes his beer and throws it in the security guard's face. and the security guard, also a larger gentleman, tackles him in the stands. Then there's probably 7 or 8 other security guards that come over. And it legitimately took them 4 to 6 minutes to drag that guy out of his seat and up to the concourse. I mean, this guy put up a fight, and that's where in regards to the Timberwolves protest, they got that woman off the court quick.
Yeah, they packed
her off the court quick.
Got her out quick. What were the other people doing while this thing was happening? Were they?
I mean, at this point, everybody within sort of 50 feet had turned around, wasn't even paying attention to the game, had brought out their cell phones, were taking pictures and video and stuff. It was wild. All right. Real quick, because most of this was just to break down those last 2 plays of the Wolves and Grizzlies. But I do want to touch on, because I noticed today on television that no one talked about Mikal Bridges last night or this morning after his masterpiece last night. So Mikal was 12 for 17 from the field, 31 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 4 blocks, 4 for 4 from 3. As the primary defender last night, the guys he guarded were 3 for 17. This was I've talked a bunch about Jimmy Butler and Jason Tatum, their two-way brilliance so far in these playoffs and the value of that. But Mikal Bridges put together a two-way masterpiece last night.
Masterpiece. 46 minutes, 54 seconds playing time.
I think what makes him – I was thinking about this a lot today, and what makes him so good, so valuable, is that Mikal Bridges could live. The Mikal Bridges we know. Let's take away any growth that he has. And we'll talk a little bit about how he got those 31 points. But let's take away any growth he has as a player. This version of Mikal Bridges can play on any championship-level team and be a starter and play 40-plus minutes in the playoffs. There's not, Tommy, I'm going to be clear on this. There's not that many guys in the league that you could say that about. We think there are. There's not.
Well, so we're going to get to some of the plays from last night in a second. I think the one other thing that we should shout out, and we've talked about this with him before, but Mikal did not miss a game in college. Has not missed a game since he got to the NBA. And so everything else aside, everything that's in the court aside, the war of attrition is a thing that every team is battling right now. And even that, part of why he's improved so much is he doesn't get nearly enough credit for just his ability to show up and just be a warrior.
People argue with me all the time about availability being a skill. And we talked about it with Kyrie in the mailbag. But I really believe this. I believe this. Like, showing up for your job, it sounds simple, but that is a skill. Not everybody can play. Like, it's hard to play injured. I'll give you that. And this is not a subtweet at any player. It is not a subtweet at Ben Simmons. It is very hard to play injured. When you have an injury, a hamstring injury, a back injury, a knee, ankle, whatever it may be, an injury. But as an NBA player, you play 82 games. You're hurt all the time. You're hurt. You've got a thigh bruise. You've got
play that many minutes. Like, yeah, he's not playing 12 minutes a night.
You got a rib out. You got a thigh bruise. You got a tweaked ankle. Your hip flexor's super sore. Like, these things, they pop up. It's inevitable. And so being able to play hurt and be effective playing hurt is a real thing. I'm not saying Mikal's hurt right now, but to go on this run that he's had where he hasn't missed any games is incredible. The full package last night. We saw the threes. We saw mid-range pull-ups. We talk about Mikal's cutting all the time. He's one of the best cutters in the league. He had multiple back cuts last night. There was a slip cut on a 21 action where he came up and set the step-up screen and slipped into space and scored. He didn't do this last night. We've talked often about his face cuts, which is the opposite of a back cut, obviously, where they set up this little misdirection pick and roll up top, and then he face cuts out of the corner. He's just a really skilled. It's basic, Tommy, but it's just so effective, and he's so skilled. And then, of course, the two-way brilliance. You know, the inefficient night that BI had, the inefficient night that CJ McCollum had, the block shots, 2-on-1 play. Just a pleasure to see. I said this going into Game 5 when I was doing ESPN stuff on Tuesday. The Phoenix Suns going into Game 5 were 29% from the three, and they just haven't shot the ball particularly well. And they were tied for seventh, around 37% overall for the regular season. They were tied for seventh in the league. They shot 37% last night, 10 for 27. Mikal was 4 for 4. The other guys were 6 for 23. Like, this is his night last night. This is the reason they're in a position to advance to the next round, was because
this is the Mikal Bridges game. Defensively, one question I had for you, we talked about this with Bam a couple weeks ago. We've obviously talked about this with Marcus as well. But the ability to guard multiple positions and the flexibility to defend BI, who we've, gassed up a ton, rightfully so, on the show over the last couple of weeks, and CJ, who's had a great playoff so far and is an amazing scorer in a bunch of different ways, the ability to go back and forth between those two and to defend those two in the same game, and basically while having this, what is it about his length and skill set that allows him to be that effective?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this a couple months ago, I think, when we talked about him at length. But the thing that's impressive to me is there's a lot of guys that are lengthy, that rely on that length because they don't have the lateral quickness. And so they get beat off the dribble quite a bit. And so they rely on those reach around, those little tips from behind, or they get the steal late. The guy gathers and goes up for the layup, and as he's bringing the ball up, they use that length to reach in. Mikal has both. Like, Mikal can stay in front of a guy, disrupt an offensive possession, get a great contest, and he still has the length where when he does get beat, and like no player doesn't ever get beat, but when he does get beat, he still has the length to do it. Just really impressed with him. Can't believe he wasn't a 76er. One other guy I want to shout out. He did only play 12 minutes last night and fouled out, but Cam Payne has really struggled in these playoffs, and he had a nice night last night. Super aggressive, hit 2 out of 3 threes. But those non-Chris Paul minutes, you need production from that, and I thought Cam's night was really important for them. Guys, we got a podcast coming out Friday, potentially tomorrow if we can get this sorted. But we'll have a podcast coming out with Ben Stiller. We'll have some analysis of the rest of the playoffs coming out. Hit the subscribe button. Appreciate y'all, and talk to you guys soon.